Welcome back to Art Appreciation! Today we will look at three very different types of native art. And we will glance at the history of indigenous artists remixing and repurposing the dominant culture's symbols in order to subvert their authority. Be sure to write down the key concepts, and at the end of the lecture, quiz yourself by filling in their definitions. Also, draw this work, the Mickey Mouse Kachina, and we will return to it at the end, so don't worry if you don't quite get it finished. But remember that the drawing can be very small, about the size of your thumb. Okay, so this typology was developed by German art historian Christian Feest, the author of our old textbook. And as an outsider, he spotted these major types of Native American art, while perhaps American art historians carelessly lumped them all under the same umbrella. But these three types are very different. They come from different cultural contexts and are also created with very different intentions, which is most important. Okay, the first type is called tribal art. It's generally made from local materials for local concerns. It's artwork that isn't really owned by an individual per se, but by a community. So it cannot be sold. And it's not meant to be sold. It's known as cultural patrimony, like human bones. And it's protected by NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. These works of art are not intended for the art market or for tourists or for the gallery and museum walls. Some examples are these war shields, headdresses, some masks, tattoos, religious icons, bundles, like these Lakota bundles for umbilical cords, the child's first toy, or this Kwakwakewak transformation mask. Also, it's important to note that most tribal art is secret. It's none of our business, and we will only superficially look at them in class. But some tribal arts are very public and open to be studied. And in some cases, the tribal arts appear influenced by European culture, like the Great Lake regional floral patterns that were actually taught at the mission schools. They were copied from floral wallpaper patterns. But these are not exact copies. They're changed a little bit. They're almost the same, but not quite, to use post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha's phrase. And it's in this not quite that we can and should read parodic, maniacal rebellion. It's an example of his idea of strategic failure, a strategy or technology of survivance employed by colonized people so that, quote, mimicry is at once resemblance and menace, end quote. Bhabha points out that colonized people all over the world will mimic the dominant culture to fit in. It's camouflage that helps them, that helps disarm racist aggression. But also, they wear and display the dominant culture symbols ironically, to own them, if you will. It's a way to fit in and a way to stand out. Even entire dress designs that might appear very colonial, like this Cherokee tear dress, are almost the same but not quite. The use of the American flag is another example of strategic failure. These aren't really American flags, are they? They have the wrong number of stars and stripes. Lakota beaded objects embellished with flag imagery. It's still tribal art, not intended for the white market. And from the outside, it looks, sort of like assimilation. Oh, look, this artist beaded the United States flag onto his jacket. How cute. But it turns out that in some cases, the flag could indicate that the owner of the jacket, or bag, or horse, fought against and killed U.S. soldiers. Lakota artisans may have employed flag imagery as code, one hidden to whites, but known to them, a code for recalling and celebrating victorious military actions against US soldiers. And in this way, the American flag actually signaled anti-American, anti-colonial activism. It's incredible because the Lakota, the great Sioux Nation, is the only nation to defeat the US Army twice. And the flag is a reminder of their victory. Flags are magical objects, and the magic of the flag would then flow into Lakota bodies through the moccasins and vests and tobacco bags to remind everyone that the Lakota earned these stars and stripes on the battlefield. There are stories of warriors that used American flags to count coup, and some compared the flag, taking the flag, to scalping. And for more about this, and to look at what is called intentional hybridity, be sure to check out Cynthia Fowler's essay, Hybridity as a Strategy for Self-Determination. Many historians and post-colonial theorists, though, point out how collecting tribal art was another kind of conquest. Collectors would pay desperate natives to go against their tribal laws to sell these important art objects. A powerful example often brought up is how the Zuni Pueblo in the late 19th and early 20th century would reportedly kill anyone caught selling their Ahayuda sacred war twins to collectors. And some works were simply not for sale, but collectors often didn't care. In fact, for the ones that were not for sale, they paid double. Now, most of the Ahayuda war twins that were sold have been returned to the tribe. Check out our textbook, page 21, except for those in private collections outside the US. But what the native artisans picked up on was this appetite for Indian art. And so we find that, certain otherwise sacred art traditions became secularized or separated from religious concerns and commodified by native communities because, well, it was business, which brings us to the second type of native art, ethnic art, sometimes called folk art or regionalist art. It's art for the marketplace. It's still brilliant and beautiful, very lucrative, often intertribal and pan-Indian, intended for the market. Examples include most art fair art, studio style or Bacon modernist style easel paintings, most pottery, which is almost always made for decoration, not for use, rugs, baskets, jewelry, sculptures, probably anything with Cocopelli on it. Pueblo rain gods are a really interesting folk art. It's a tradition that was literally invented for white tourists. There are no Pueblo rain gods. Also, of course, the ubiquitous dream catcher has become a folk art tradition. Beaded lanyards, keychains, whimsies, anything considered curio, which is short for curiosity. Kachina dolls, anything for a curio cabinet. Especially around the turn of the 20th century, when industrial life with its factories and machines was truly suffocating everyone's soul. These native baskets and blankets and other artworks were used by settlers to capture a whiff of the good old days. They were proof also that you went, on an adventure to Santa Fe. White people were so desperate for a return to the land, to nature, that they paid really good money for these portals to the past, these comfort objects. And they filled their homes with elaborate bric-a-brac Indian corners. Collectors valued native baskets in particular. Some of Louisa Kaiser's baskets, also known as Dat So La Li, sold for tens of thousands of dollars each. In fact, Otis Mason of the Smithsonian in 1904 famously described this frenzy for native baskets, a disease-like craze. Canastromania, basket fever. Pomo baskets in particular became popular curio, most famous for the feathered and shell beads. These baskets, they hang like chandeliers, the jingling shells calling to mind a dancer. Pomo and Hoopa, California baskets, feathered baskets. They were, miniaturized and turned into curio. A sad part of this story is that baskets and other tribal turned ethnic arts were quickly picked up and used by settlers to further assimilate native people. By 1901, boarding schools began incorporating native folk arts into their curriculum, and children were literally colonized through art, and that they were forced to make designs that did not align with their own tribal traditions, but instead were chosen by their non-native art teachers to make and sell to the white market. Of course, encouraging art making in Indian boarding schools killed two birds with one stone. It turned the children into productive capitalists, and it saved the United States national soul. This policy of assimilation shifted to preservation due to settler guilt, genocidal guilt. But this is a pattern we see in the movement of cultural conquest. The previous world or environment becomes a work of art in the new invisible environment, as Marshall McLuhan famously put it. Settler promotion and collection of indigenous art is also textbook imperialist nostalgia, which is Renato Rosaldo's term for this pattern, where agents of colonialism yearn for and celebrate the cultures they've destroyed. This is, of course, the reason why the US names its states and cities, streets, cars, sports teams, and more after indigenous cultures. Because native sells too. Indian sells. It stands for something authentically American. And it helped the white settler imagine Indians as their own ancestors. Sort of proto-Americans, which is really twisted. Okay, then the third type of art, and the art that we're going to focus on in class, is contemporary Native American art. Contemporary artists, they will remix imagery from the dominant culture, just like tribal and ethnic artists. Remixing, meaning repurposing, sampling, cutting up, remaking. As we see in these examples, these artists create by taking material from the contemporary world, a tennis shoe, a highway sign, a baseball cap, and indigenizing it. Indigenizing. And this is done in stereotypical ways. Brian Jungin, for example, skins Nike shoes and adds long black hair to make it look like a Northwest Coast style mask. How typical of a Native American artist. James Luna indigenizes a MAGA hat by adding beads and feathers and an apparent misspelling. Of course, it's the German spelling of America. And on a hat that already symbolizes white supremacy to many people, the K communicates some other things. Also, indigenizing can be done in non-stereotypical ways, and some contemporary Native art doesn't, at first look like it was made by a Native artist. You might not even know it unless you looked it up. For example, in New York Purchased, Stolen, Reclaimed by Edgar Heapabirds, we see that he remixes the signs of the state, the literal state highway signs, with questions from Indian country. Heapabirds often says that street signs connote settler authority, and we read and trust them automatically without thinking. He likes subverting that authority and trust by turning a sign about distance into a sign about indigenous resistance. And I asked Heap of Birds where he fabricated New York Purchased, Stolen, Reclaimed. And he chuckled that he used the same company that manufactures the actual New York State highway signs, which makes them almost completely identical. What did Picasso and Steve Jobs say? Good artists copy, but great artists steal. And this approach to art making and information sharing is rampant across creative platforms, from science to religion, now more than ever, which is why our culture has been unofficially dubbed remix culture. We are, quote, a society that allows and encourages derivative works by combining or editing existing materials to produce new products, end quote. In his book, Remix Culture, Harvard Law professor and founder of the Creative Commons, Lawrence Lessig, relates this historical phase of cultural evolution to computer file sharing permissions. He says there are generally two types of files: read-only, RO, and read-write, RW. And we are currently watching this older form shift into the newer as more people learn to program and become producers. Program or be programmed, as media theorist Douglas Rushkoff puts it, and it appears that this metaphor of sharing permissions is extremely useful when looking at indigenous art from all over the world. You know, when we zoom out, we can see how colonized people repurpose and remix the dominant culture's materials in order to read-write them, rewrite them, and resist them. It's a counterintuitive Aikido move, using the power of the opponent against them. Remixing also becomes a way to exercise some degree of agency and autonomy, to experience something other than read only. Remixing, it's flexing creative agency. And this is one reason why multiracial artist Merritt Johnson, it's one reason she says she remixes objects from the dominant culture. Last year, Johnson released a new installment of her Exercising America DIY video series on YouTube. Her calming voice describes exactly how to make a ladder out of an American flag in both English and Spanish. And I asked Johnson why she remixes the flag specifically, and she made some really important points we should take some time to understand. She says, quote, "The U.S. flag has been used as a symbol of settler claim, ownership, and to assert the sovereignty of a settler government on indigenous land. It's present at borders and federal and state buildings and parks as a reminder that there is no public land. There is no acknowledgement of indigenous connection to land alongside the U.S. flag, as many indigenous nations have flags. So, to make the flag into something that functions to oppose the power and sovereignty of U.S. border enforcement makes sense to me. It's a simple action, and it's a form of creation through destruction, which is sometimes necessary. It connects to so much of life and survival in terms of how energy is converted and how living things survive. Remixing is a form of agency as well. It makes space for multiplicity and intersectionality of voices and experiences," end quote. Merritt Johnson, she's also known for weaving bomb-shaped baskets filled with corn kernels, visual reminders that indigeneity is a weapon against colonialism. And multiracial Athapascan artist Erica Lord also creates through destruction in her American Land Reclamation Project. It's an installation that explores the repetition of broken treaties. Using only the red stripes from the flag, the blood, Lord creates one prayer tie for each of these broken treaties, and then suspends them from the ceiling with sinew. Usually prayer ties are filled with tobacco. And for many indigenous traditions, tying knots is a kind of praying. used for healing. Lord's bundles are filled with dirt from reservations and tribal lands, and she installed mirrors on the ceiling, walls, and floor of the square room to further multiply the prayer ties and amplify the message. Okay, now we're back to the Mickey Mouse Kachina. So we know that through remixing, colonized people can encode their own histories into the dominant symbols, thus ensuring their survival, because dominant symbols, after all, have incredible staying power. And a striking example of this is the popular Mickey Mouse kachinas. They were popular in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And this kachina is actually the ancient Hopi mouse hero Tucson Homichi, dressed up as Mickey Mouse. Tucson Homichi is famous for saving his friends and his family from a vicious hawk. And now his black and white war paint helps him become Mickey Mouse to fight colonialism and to sell more kachinas to tourists. It's a brilliant and humorous play and remix of cultural symbols. I think it's interesting when we think about how the story of Tucson Homichi, the plucky, dirty rodent, echoes the Hopi's fight against the United States government. A little mouse is up against a humongous hawk. It's David and Goliath, where the underdog wins, not only by collaborating with the natural world, but also by using their opponent's gifts against them. The hawk is so large, so fast, and so confident that he impales himself onto a hidden spear the mouse set up in the ground beforehand. It is important to note that hybrid and remixed Native American art objects are not so much collaborations between two cultures, because lopsided power relations don't create an environment suitable for real collaboration. No, hybridity here is more of a technology of survival and resistance, a strategy of survivance. But yeah, it's through a visual mashup. The settler colonial symbol, Mickey Mouse, now reminds Hopi people of their own stories and spirituality, of their own strengths, of home. Hybrid, multiculturally encoded objects, like Mickey Mouse kachinas, are sometimes called double objects or double agents, since they come from different cultures and can speak different languages. Our Lady of Guadalupe may be another example of a double agent, arguably the most distributed image of all time. On one level, she represents the quickest way to convert or assimilate a people. Make the new god look like them so they can relate to it. But on another level, she represents the best way to stay connected to your indigenous roots in the face of genocide. Make the new god look like you so you are continually reminded of your own people. Is Mother Mary dressed up as a Native American? Or is a Native American dressed up as Mother Mary? Or both? Neither? Is this an entirely new hybrid being? Which of the two cultures actually started the story of the Lady of Guadalupe doesn't really matter either, because it was quickly picked up and spread like a meme, or like technology, like medicine, maybe even like armor. And we should remember that art and armor and arsenal, arms, artillery, are all etymologically related to that root word, ars. Okay, so there are Native American Mickey Mice, Native American Mothers of Christ. And now let's take another look at Native American flags and how they too are agents of resistance. Textile scholar Kate Kent calls this 19th century Navajo weaving one of the first pictorials It's not a flag, it's a picture of a flag. Purposefully incomplete. We get to see its guts. And while half of the textile depicts a version of the American flag, the other half is a kind of eye dazzler, so named for its brilliant colors and patterns. And to the initiated, this is not just an American flag. Those crosses, for example, are not just stars, but are also symbols for the four holy mountains, which demarcate the Navajo homeland, Deneta, or Denebakeya. The cross also signifies the four directions, the four holy winds, which are gods, and it is also a reminder of the four worlds that emerged and unfolded into ours. Navajo crosses also connote the important whirling logs story. Some of them are separated from their canton, forming a constellation that could be Cassiopeia, the Great Mother. It could also maybe be the tail of Scorpio, the Navajo rabbit. One of them is blue. The crosses also may point to grave markers and remind some Navajo people of the long walk and internment at Bosque Redondo. And this makes sense considering the eye dazzler is also a symbol of that time in internment. Also, those stripes at the bottom harken back to the first phase chief's blankets. Stripes signified wisdom and power already. Like stars and crosses, they are much older than the American flag. Also, these two types of textiles are brought together, but they're also visually separated and yet also connected. Okay, that's it for today. Be sure to read our required reading this week. And as soon as your textbooks arrive, choose a work that you want to interview. All right, what's a good sign off? Look out for the art, or keep waking up, showing up, and growing up. All right, bye. Boo.